The success of large speculators like Livermore and Durant lured smaller investors to Wall Street. But Charles Mitchell, president of National City Bank, virtually invented the idea of mass marketing stocks and bonds to the general public. This was a totally new idea and a huge success.
The bank, prior to Father being elected president in 1921, was geared mainly to doing business with large corporations. Father pointed the bank for the first time in the direction of going after the little man. And
don't call him the little man, it was every man.
Well, Jedermann, all right. How old was he then? 38 years old. And the National City Company had 4 offices. I know within 3 years there were over 50 offices. And by 1929 it was the largest distributor of securities in the world.
Even at the height of the speculative frenzy, only a small percentage of the American public actually invested in stocks. But the market had entered popular culture. Wall Street became Main Street. Everyone was talking stocks. Watching the ticker became a national sport. Popular magazines covered financial news. Dozens of bestsellers promised investors the inside track.
Oh, what a feeling. You got me feeling bigger and better than ever.
The characters in the popular comic strip Gasoline Alley were investing in a company called Rubber Keyhole. Stock tips came from everywhere. Some investors followed the advice of Evangeline Adams, an astrologer.
She was able to calculate the variations of the stock exchange so accurately that there was practically no difference to having read it in a ledger somewhere. Among her more interesting clients were Charles Chaplin, Mary Pickford, and J. Pierpont Morgan.
In February, Evangeline Adams looked at the stars and predicted a dramatic upswing in stock prices for the coming months.
I'm looking up at the sky. I see the clouds rolling by. Hello, sunshine, hello. I'll say you long over.
The stock market, once considered a highly risky place to put your money, was now beginning to attract a whole new group of amateur speculators. Among the new players was one Julius Marx. Everyone knew him by his stage name, Groucho.
They were poor, and my father, it always affected my father, because he was always kind of thrifty and worried about his future and where it would become of him when no one else wanted him as an actor anymore. So he was always saving money, turning off the lights and turning off the water around the house, even after he was in Hollywood and making a lot of money.
Of all the Marx brothers, Groucho was the most financially conservative. In 1929, he took his life savings and put it in a sure thing, the stock market.
He was always phoning a broker and getting hot tips and wanting to know what the stocks were, how they were doing. And if he wasn't on the phone, he would take me into Great Neck, which was a little village at the time, but they did have a stockbroker called Newman Brothers and Worms, and all these men who were investing in the market would all sit there in chairs like a little theater and watch the ticker tape go by.
Groucho, along with record numbers of smaller investors, was borrowing money to buy stocks. It was called buying on margin. You only needed 10% down. Just $1,000 would get you $10,000 worth of stock. Suddenly you were in the same league with the big players, or so it seemed. But the stock market was not a level playing field.
In the 20s and 30s, one of the big features of the stock market is the fact that it wasn't controlled and that operators could do a lot of things that are not permitted today.
One of the most common tactics was to manipulate the price of a particular stock. A stock like Radio Corporation of America.
RCA was in the 20s what Xerox was in the 60s, what was a great growth stock. The stock went from, I can't remember the exact numbers, but from something like 20 to 400, split many times. and made many people, including my grandfather, very wealthy. It was one of the stocks that was manipulated by a pool.
Wealthy investors would pool their money in a secret agreement to buy a stock, inflate its price, and then sell it to an unsuspecting public. Most stocks in the 1920s were regularly manipulated by insiders, like RCA specialist Michael Meehan.
In those days, that was legal, and it was quite common practice for a group of Wall Streeters to take a stock in hand, and they would acquire a position in the stock early on, and then they would see to it that there was good press on the stock, a lot of publicity.
I would say that practically all the financial journals will undertake. This includes reporters for the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Herald Tribune, you name it. So if you were a pool operator, you'd call your friend at the Times and say, look, Charlie, there's an envelope waiting for you here, and we think that perhaps you should write something nice about RCA. And Charlie would write something nice about RCA. A publicity man called A. Newton Plummer had canceled checks from practically every major journalist in New York City.
Then they would begin to what was called painting the tape, and they would make the stock look exciting. They would trade among themselves, and you'd see these big prints in RCA, and people will say, oh, it looks as though that stock is being accumulated.
Now, if they are behind it, you want to join them. So you go out and you buy stock also. And what's happening is the stock goes from 10 to 15 to 20, and now it's at 20, and you start buying. Other people start buying, 30, 40. The original group, the pool, they stop buying. They're selling you the stock. Now 50, and they're out of it. And what happens, of course, is the stock collapses.